afternoon. I'm delighted to be here at the speaking at the 6th International Conference on Energy Research and Development in Kuwait. I'm speaking about one of the most important issues for the energy industry and for energy research in buildings. And that is getting occupied buildings to perform well, to perform as intended at the design stage, and not, for example, use typically up to twice the amount of energy that is expected from that's expected from the design and construction stages. You can't legislate or restrict the amount of energy that a building consumes in its occupied stage. You can't legislate for this because you don't know how the building's going to be used. There has not been a single case where that legislation has been carried out. So we rely on the energy certification and labeling of buildings for occupied buildings. So I'm going to address what these schemes are, what they aim to do and how they do it, what makes these schemes successful, opportunities for research and development, and opportunities for international collaboration. So, what do these schemes do? They move the market. They shift the bell curve away from compliance, the lawbreakers, towards improved performance. They lift the performance of the market leaders because all the buildings are performing better. And the genuine innovators, the 5% on the right there, also get lifted. If you look at schemes like BREEAM and LEED, and Neighbours, they've had to invent special categories, platinum categories, 6-star categories, to cope with the fact that the market has moved, in many cases because of their own actions. And that improvement has resulted in a reduction in energy use, and they need to be able to have higher standards. So that all goes to show that it works. That's what these schemes are aiming to do. But you might ask, is this all a bit marginal? Is it important? And is it a bit fluffy and not very well specified? Well, first, it's not marginal. I call this my Pac-Man slide. But energy use in buildings in 2020 and 2030, this is more like 2030. How much of the energy use will be determined by regulations and legislation for new buildings? The answer is it depends. The precise figures depend on what you include in new buildings. You're talking about churn, major refurb, that sort of thing. But the majority of the energy use will be in existing buildings. And a great deal of the work in terms of research and development and in terms of legislation is concerned with just the new building and major refurbishments. So, you cannot mandate, you cannot control by law the energy use of a building. Anybody choose to question that? It's not a fact. I think you can mandate energy standards, insulation standards, you can mandate new construction standards, but you cannot legislate how much energy a building uses. And yet, according to the pie chart, the existing buildings are going to be using the great majority of the energy use in, say, 2020 and in 2030. So certification and labeling schemes are just about the only game in town for dealing with those buildings. They're not straightforward. They need research and development, and they need market development. So they need both. They need concentrated work, both in technical and marketing. And people need an incentive to do them. Why would you get involved in a scheme of that sort? Okay, that's slightly small reading, so I'll read them out. These are some of the incentives associated with such schemes. Lower operating costs, the top one. Higher building value for owners. Higher return on investment for developers. Better occupancy values. Better rent ratios. So how do these schemes work? First thing is, you need an incentive to proceed. We just saw some examples then. There's got to be a direct benefit for the people who are actually getting engaged with the scheme, and for the owner and the occupier to push them into it. You've got to have traction with the market. It's got to appear to be important to the ultimate market. So again, that's the owners and the occupiers. And for that, you need evidence of the effectiveness and the success of the schemes, and you need publicity about that evidence. You need a link from the design to the operational stage, because you cannot mandate energy use in the operational stage. You need to continue the engagement with rating the energy use during the operational phase, maybe 5 or 10 years. Your operational rating must be effective, and it has to have benchmarks and adjustments, has to have a rating procedure, which is quite technical. And I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of mistakes made in this area, as an extremely fruitful area for more technical development, research, and development work. Lastly, increasingly, people are saying, okay, it's not just energy, these buildings have got to perform, people have got to be happy. We need assessments of what the occupants think about it, what the internal environment is like, and that it has to have the correct scope and the correct approach. Here are some of the schemes that you might be aware of. I'd be interested to know if you are aware of them. If we start with MASHRAE's own building energy quotient scheme in the middle there, Energy Star, Golden Globes, and LEED, those are all heavily associated with the United States. We've got BREEAM, which is originally associated with the UK. We've got Neighbours, which is originating in Australia. We've got DGNB in Germany, and CASB in Japan. The schemes and their benefits are inevitably going to be compared. There's usually a choice of which scheme you use. Quite often, depending on the country, there doesn't seem to be a choice, but increasingly there is a choice. This is an example of a comparison of LEED, BREEAM, and DGNB. And there's a direct comparison of what different schemes are perceived as a building value rising by 11% there, building value rising by 18%. And there's also got improved occupancy, health and productivity, and high quality end product for owners, and improved health and well-being for users. All these are increasingly seen as very important aspects of these schemes. So you've got the incentive to participate. What about gaining traction with the market? This slide shows buildings with performance labeling in grand scale on all the buildings. I don't know if you can see it. It's got the performance certificates all over these buildings, and it's clearly a Photoshop job. But it's what we all, people involved in these things wanted and what we expected. The slide was produced by Terry Dix of ARP and used a certification that we developed in a 10-nation European project in 2003. It's a fair time ago. And that certification became the center of, or the basis for one of the very few mandatory labeling schemes in the world. The GB Display Energy Certificate Scheme. So this is one of the of those certificates. They are mandatory in all large public buildings in Great Britain, and there's been about 200,000 of them to date. They have to be displayed in the foyer or in the entrance of the building. And I don't know if you know, but the EU directives, European directives, are generated by the European Union, but they're implemented separately by each of the member states. And the different member states put their own laws into action. And different states chose different ways to do that. Some of them used an operational rating like this, which depends on the actual kilowatt hours per meter squared, what I think MASHRAE would call an EUI, and which is effectively what this is. And but Great Britain did that, but Scotland and quite some other states in the EU just used the design energy, modeled energy rating, and just put that up in the same buildings. And it was a very interesting comparison between the approaches. And increasingly, it's becoming apparent that if you actually rate the performance of a building in use, you get downward pressure over a 5-10 year period, which you just don't get from the modeled energy rating systems. Now, how well has that actually worked? Well, as I said, there's been 200,000 of these. The enforcement within the country wasn't perfect. It's been good, but not perfect. And I don't know if you can read that, but this was put on a lamp case. It's a joke, and it was in a publication building magazine, and it's a missing certificate, like you would have a missing pet. I don't know, and surely it's got to be somewhere. And it's people kicking up a fuss because some very high profile, I think one of the government's big legal departments did not have a certificate in its own building. And so there's a few, but on the whole it was integrated quite well. And it enabled a number of large-scale comparisons, which is one of the, what you might call name and shame, which is, and this is an area of London, and these are all the buildings with their display energy certificate ratings marked on, and Freedom of Information Act was used to publish information like that. One thing that did happen was that the rule you need to keep, and this is where the research and development and the technical work comes in, you need to keep the rating system fully effective. And to my mind, it's important, therefore, that the rating system is actually developed by the people that are using it. And I think the BEQ is an example of that. I think Energy Star is an example of that. In the UK, I think the system was actually controlled by the legislators, and it drifted away a bit, it's quite an interesting lesson, that. And for example, originally, you could treat a whole campus like a university or a large hospital or a defense establishment as one establishment, and that's what we had the correct benchmarks for. But later, due to a reinterpretation of the law, they had to look at every building within those. And that sounds good, but they didn't develop separate benchmarks for them, so there was a mismatch. Now, to my mind, that would never have happened with BEQ or Energy Star, because they control their own process. So I think and it shows how important it is to keep the rating system that you use. It's got to be really effective, and the benchmarks have got to be seen as being absolutely as valid as you can, because that's what keeps the end market interested. They're thinking this really is going to make a difference to what we're doing, and I'll come back to that later with some of the examples. So, just going through three examples here. The building energy quotient, to my mind, just going through each of those criteria. The incentive to proceed, I would say, with a building energy quotient, applies mainly to the building operators and the specialists involved. The traction with the ultimate market, again, I would say that is not as strong as it might be. And I think just having, when looking through all these different schemes, I think that's something that came out from it. And maybe, arguably, it's possible, I misinterpreted, maybe a lesson for there, I would say. The link to design from design to operation in BEQ is basically through a pair of spreadsheets which are related. And so you have the operational spreadsheet, which is the continuing engagement. But I think the issue of continuing that engagement in time and involving the operators is interesting as well. And the operational rating itself is a fairly straightforward energy use to meter squared, linked to the scheme's own benchmarks or CBEC benchmarks. In terms of occupant IEQ assessment, I'm not aware of any related module or facility for that within the scheme. Now, neighbours is an interesting scheme as well. It originated in Australia, and it's originated as an operational rating. So this is probably one of the only other ones that I'm aware of where an operational rating, which looks at your actual energy use per square meter, was mandated by the government. Now, it didn't start like that. It started as a voluntary one for mainly speculative rented office buildings in New South Wales and areas around there. But it became very successful, and in the end, the New South Wales government and other governments mandated its use, which is interesting. So it sort of worked the other way around. The system was there and was working, and the government thought, yeah, we'll have a bit of that. And I would say that the incentive and the traction with the market are both very strong for that scheme. It was seen to reduce operating costs, and it was seen as a desirable thing for occupied properties to have a high number of stars. It started off with 2.5 stars being the median, and I think 4.5 stars is now the median. 5 stars was the maximum. They had to invent 6 stars, which was halfway between 5 stars and no energy use. And 6 stars is now not uncommon. So I think in terms of traction with the market, actually getting the market interested, it's really interesting. It worked well. And then there was another fascinating aspect to that, which is the CA, the commitment agreement. So what happened was that people who were briefing and commissioning new offices couldn't get a star rating because it's a metered consumption. You don't get that for 2 years till the building's been operating for 2 years, say. So you can't get that. So the new buildings, in marketing terms, had something missing. They couldn't do it. So they have set up 5 years ago a commitment agreement process where the design team commits to a certain number of stars, say 4.5 stars or 5 stars, it's got many interesting aspects there. One thing is that that's a commitment by the developer, the design team, the construction team. So the first thing is, how do you make that happen? You have modeling guidance, modeling for performance, not for compliance. You model the building as you expect it to perform, the energy use. You model individual meters so that you can check up. If your overall building isn't working, you can check up that individual meters doing the chillers or the roof condensers or the boiler are actually using what you expect, and you can track down what the difference is. And I think the last interesting aspect was, is it compliance? Are you saying, right, from now on, you have to have 4.5 stars to comply? No, it isn't. What happens is, the neighbours guys go in and they say, we don't like the look of this, we don't think this is going to work as well as you're committed to. And the designers and the constructors can either take notice of that or they can't. If they don't take notice of it, and then it fails to meet its standard, then you get very, very unhappy tenants and occupants, and you tend to get them getting rid of their tenancies. You get poor rent retainment and things like that. So, to my mind, the interesting thing there is that it comes from the market. It's the market requesting that they want the performance that you've committed to. Lastly, there is an associated IEQ assessment module for neighbours. It's voluntary, as it were. It's separate, but it's in the same family, and it's called Neighbours IEQ. And increasingly, this is the way I think that the successful schemes are going to have to go. You're going to have to label the building and its energy, and either have part of that as an IEQ or occupant satisfaction, or have that as a compulsory part of it. The next one's Energy Star and Portfolio Manager. This, I think, has good market traction. It's very widely used. Now, is this just due to the huge marketing budgets for this scheme and the federal support? Who can tell? But it's quite interesting that their website and their marketing does major on these aspects of appealing directly to the end market and providing an incentive for people, for the technicians and the people, the building managers, to actually use the schemes. And another interesting aspect about Energy Star is that they have a design to earn commitment, which is a direct parallel of the commitment agreement in Neighbours, so that you can have new buildings where there's a stated design to achieve a certain Energy Star or Portfolio Manager standard, and it's a written one, and it's published, and it's published to everybody and the future occupants. So it's again an aspect where this becomes pressure, market pressure, for the performance of the building to be maintained. Again and again, it seems to be market pressure from the occupants and the owners of the buildings, which makes these schemes successful. Also, then you need to feed that back. So you need the measurement of evidence that you're affecting all these issues that we had listed earlier: the building value, the rental rates, the things that the owners will be attracted to, as well as reducing the native costs, the underlying costs for the occupants, which is usually, if you aren't careful, that's what everybody says, that's what we're trying to do. But actually, that isn't enough. You've got to appeal to all the underlying market factors to make these schemes successful. Right, so going on to the occupants and what one can do about those, and the occupant assessment and indoor environmental quality, indoor air quality. I'm just going to talk about a scheme that's linked to the Soft Landings Initiative, and this is the building use study. Whoa, would be if it could. if we can do anything with that. The building, I'm going to carry on. Okay, the building use studies Arup occupancy satisfaction survey. This is the first half. Yeah, I won't expect you to read that, but it's a series of aspects that are assessed by a survey arrangement. Overall satisfaction with comfort conditions in the building. It's quite rigorous academically. Occupants vote on each aspect, a bit like the predicted mean vote that Dr. Lil mentioned this morning, the FANGA predicted mean vote. And a database of responses is built up over a period of time so that the median vote on each aspect for nationally, for everybody to date, is known, and its range or confidence. And that median vote can be compared with the median vote for any particular building. In this particular building, this is overall comfort. There's the national benchmark, and there's the building, and it's better. So the overall comfort is good. The summer temperatures, there's the satisfaction vote on summer temperatures, and there's the for the country, and there's the building. So that's one that it didn't do so well on. Air quality, both summer and winter, both very good, well, pretty good, significantly higher than averages. Noise, very bad, way below their ranges and don't even overlap. So this gives quite a clear message for this building. Here's a picture of the building, the Portland building. It's a mixed mode building in Portsmouth, southern England. The second half of the occupant assessment. There we go. And this is really considers the health management and control strategies. So, okay, I'll have to read it off here then, if I can. Yeah, it's the lighting controls are good, very, very high. Looks like noise control, you might guess, is poor. Health and forgiveness is an interesting one. Especially forgiveness is an interesting one. That was a derived aspect from the responses in absolute terms, and of all the different bits, and then what people thought about overall, because they were given a chance to vote on overall on the building. And if the responses on all the individual ones were quite average or not particularly brilliant, but overall people were very happy with the building, that was taken to be an interesting comment on the fact that that building, they obviously liked the building, you know, because the individual things weren't great, but the overall impression was positive, and that's what that forgiveness measured. Here's another go at indoor environment. It's the neighbours module, as it were, and it's quite interesting to see what they're looking at here. So they're looking at thermal services, indoor air quality, acoustic comfort, lighting, and office layout. Office layout, I think, is a really interesting one. And the scheme has either, in each box, has either M or MS or cross. M is measurement, S is survey, a cross is not worried about it. And it's divided into, I don't know if you have these terms here, base building, tenancy, and whole building. So that if you've got a leased building to tenants, you've got the base building services, and then that's separated from the individual tenants' services. But in some buildings you have the whole building. No, so it's not surprising that you're not too worried about the lighting in the office layout in the offices for when you're looking at the base building. Conversely, you're not going to do a survey on those. You're going to have to do measurements on those. And then these ones, for the base building, you're going to have to do a survey for the office layout. There's no real way you can actually assess the office layout. You've got to do a survey of that. And so this is how the neighbours module goes about assessing the occupancy satisfaction to go along with the occupancy, the occupied energy use assessment that they do as the main, as it were, the main product. The last aspect of how these schemes work is what I would call high-level process. I'm going to look at two of these. These are really taking, it's like some of the ISO standards. They're taking what you need to do and not really concerned with it so much with exactly how you do it. So this can have very big advantages in the sense that if there are good existing procedures for energy rating, for example, you can use those. And it can help to get over the fact that some rating systems are quite techy. They're not appealing to the ultimate market. And so this sort of process can do that. So sorts of things, those are the two examples look at very briefly. The sorts of things they look at, you have the specification of processes, and this is looking at what the various parts are trying to achieve, not how they do it. Looking at the outputs, the actions, you've got to have monitoring progress, you've got to have management feedback, and you've got to have a review and update process. So looking at ISO 50001, which I think I expect many people to be familiar with. So you've got the past and present energy uses there. You've got to look at the relevant variables affecting energy use there. You've got the analysis, identifying significant areas of energy use. You've got the opportunities. And then this is really the sort of management output. And in many cases, those are not dealt with very explicitly. And it's the sort of thing that can help people make sure that their processes work properly and provide what they need. This I'm not sure is fair to classify as a high-level process. MASHRAE 100, it does deal with the high-level requirements of the various stages, but I think it's fair to say that it majors on the energy rating side of things and what I call the benchmarks, the EUIs, for very large number of different regions and types of buildings, with alternative benchmarks possibly accounted for quite happily. So, and I'm not going to go into that in any detail at the moment. So what are the opportunities for collaboration? To my mind, the best single opportunity is the high-level process. And the reason is that we've got lots of different schemes. Where do they fit into a scheme that we can all agree is what's needed? And you've got BEQ, you've got neighbours, you've got the lead energy assessments and BREEAM in use. All of these, in order to prevent competition, you need a high-level process, which I believe is something that can be achieved and is worth striving for. So you need to be probably considerably more specific than the underlying ISO that I showed you. And it would have to relate to building energy labeling and building energy in use and linking to the design stage. It would not necessarily have to specify the specific rating systems involved. You'd be able to have systems where evidence for its effectiveness was collected across the whole world, it wouldn't be restricted, and there could be some significant programs for that. Then you could start pulling in, again, agnostically, without specifying which ones you have to use, a requirement to have indoor air quality and occupancy satisfaction incorporated in them. So, just going back on all that, the things that make these schemes work need a direct incentive for people to undertake or to get involved in the first place. You need to have evidence of effectiveness, and you need to have publicity for that. You need to have, and that is a thing that is often missing from these schemes. You need to show that the rating schemes are technically suitable. You need to maintain continuing involvement after the building's occupied, and you need to be able to bring in occupant health and well-being as at least as an option, because that's going to be increasingly important. Lastly, there's the possibility of having a high-level process which could be agreed and which requires all of the above without specifying what particular approaches are taken. The particular opportunities for technical R&D would be in developing the rating systems and in the occupant health and well-being, both of which are active fields at the moment, but they're not necessarily, to my mind, fitted into schemes which would provide the benefit that an overall high-level agreed scheme would provide. Thank you very much.